It's Claire Snowden here, and it's 12 o'clock, so I think it's time to start. We have a nice group of around about 20 people or so here, so that's really nice. We're going to hear from Dr. Sandra Galvin and Dr. Elaine Finucane today. They're going to talk to us about the People's Trial, and that connects to the work that Declan Devane presented at our last webinar on the START programme. So when the recordings are both available on our website, you might want to look at these two presentations as a pair, especially if you weren't there last time to have heard about the START programme. Sandra is a programme manager for the Health Research Board Trial Methodology Research Network, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with. Sandra was involved in setting up the network, and along with the executive committee, she's responsible for shaping its strategic direction as well as delivering on some of the core activities of the network. So you've probably come across a lot of other things that she's done in one way or another. And she sees her work as promoting the importance of making trials and healthcare better. And the project that they're going to talk about today is clearly an important part of that. Elaine is a midwife and also a Cochrane Fellow and Research Associate in the Centre for Health Evaluation, Methodology Research and Evidence Synthesis, which is at the National University of Ireland in Galway. And Elaine's research is mainly based in maternity care setting. So some really interesting things to hear about, and I'm going to pass straight over to Sandra and Elaine so that we can use the time well. We'll be able to come back to you for questions later on, so if you have any thoughts during the presentation, please put them in the chat box and we'll come back to you for questions. I'm going to go on mute now, and thank you very much, Sandra and Elaine.
Thanks very much, Claire and Rianfa. Thanks for all the organisation and getting this webinar together. My name is Sandra Galvin, and as Claire mentioned, I'm presenting today with Elaine Finucane. We're both based in NUI Galway on the Wild Atlantic Way in the west of Ireland. However, we are both in different locations today for today's webinar. For today's webinar, I'm going to kick off and talk a little bit about, I suppose, where the People's Trial fits. And more broadly, I never miss an opportunity to talk about the HRB Trials Methodology Research Network, so I'll just give a little bit of a snapshot into the work that we do there. Moving on to the People's Trial, where that came from, how this fits. Then I'll pass over to Elaine. She's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the People's Trial, and then I'll come back in at the end and talk a bit more about impact and about the next steps for the People's Trial. For those that are interested, just at the outset, the website for the People's Trial is www.thepeoplestrial.ie. Really do welcome everyone to go and have a look and have a little bit more of a closer look at what we're talking about. And as will become apparent, the People's Trial is really active across the various social media avenues as well. So as part of, I suppose I call it the day job, I'm the Programme Manager for the Health Research Board Trials Methodology Research Network, the HRB TMRN, and I promise to keep the acronyms to a minimum going forward. So we are a national support network funded by the Health Research Board in Ireland across 5 university-funded partners. The day job and what we're really concerned about is strengthening and improving the conduct of randomised trials across each of the important key steps of a trial. So starting off at looking at selecting your research question, then moving on to looking at trial design, the conduct, the analysis, the reporting, the dissemination of findings. The network has a very broad remit, and we do a lot of work across each of the steps of a trial. The network itself is active on Twitter, and we've over 3,200 followers, and I'd welcome anyone to join us. It's at HRB TMRN is the handle there. And if you're interested in any of the activities of the TMRN, including the People's Trial, we'd love to hear from you, and you can reach out to me at the email address is the hrb-tmrn@nuigalway.ie. So I suppose I've kind of called this slide a little bit of name dropping, and I suppose I wanted to get across that the TMRN is actively engaging in a number of different organisations when it comes to strengthening and improving the conduct of randomised trials, both nationally in Ireland and internationally. We're very proud to be a part of the new partnership. So many of you will be familiar with the Trials Methodology Research Partnership, which has been recently funded by the MRC and in the NIHR. And we're even prouder to say that we're the only non-UK based partner within this. So the partnership has opened up, and we have already for several years worked very closely with our partners within that partnership. And some of the organisations and the initiatives that we work with on a daily basis, I've listed here. These are just a snapshot. Delighted to say we work with over 70 international collaborators on our projects and on the work we do within the TMRN on a daily basis. And these are just some of the guys that help us out on our daily basis, and in particular Trial Forge and the University of Aberdeen through the HSRU there, members of that team are involved specifically on the People's Trial as well. So looking at the TMRN, and I suppose kind of looking at where this came from, where the People's Trial came from, we initially started off 5 years ago with 3 pillars of support. So we support researchers in their day jobs and in their embedding research methodology work packages within their grant applications through our support services. We also fund research through our research and innovation programme, so we are a funding body in our own right, funding studies within a trial in particular. And we also have, thankfully, 2 cohorts now of PhD scholars across the funded university partners, all primarily involved in trial methodology research. Our training and education scheme has been very successful, and to date we've welcomed over 11,000 individuals through our doors, both nationally and also with an online presence. But I suppose what grew organically from the network over the last 5 years was this pillar around public engagement. We didn't have it on our first application for funding, but it became a very central part of our second application for funding, for which we're 2 years into the journey now. So the public engagement pillar, as I say, it grew organically. It's something that we knew that we should deliver on, and it came from the various work that we do within the HRB TMRN. The scientific director of the HRB TMRN is Professor Declan Devan, and Claire mentioned that he's previously delivered a webinar for the START initiative. Those of you that have had the pleasure of working with Declan will know a couple of things about him. He's not afraid to take a risk, but he's also really values the importance of having a lot of fun when you're involved in research, and particularly when you want to engage with the general public. In making research accessible, fun and engaging, I think has been a key success for the work of the TMRN and indeed the public engagement work that we do. So the public engagement pillar, as I mentioned, it kind of came organically, but we became very aware through the work of the TMRN that we wanted to help create an awareness among the general public of the importance of randomised controlled trials. So basically, what are they? Why do we need them? What are the benefits of taking part in a randomised trial? Why is it that we're so concerned about them? And I think I always had this understanding that people knew what trials were, so to speak. And it was a couple of years ago, we were involved in a research study where we had opened up a survey to the general public, and we had asked people to feed back their thoughts on the priorities for research within trial recruitment. And a number of members of the public came back to us, and it always stuck in my mind that they had this myth or misconception that they felt that randomisation was actually laziness on behalf of the trial recruiter, that it was removing their freedom of choice and that it was ignoring patient preferences. And I think I was quite shocked when I saw that, because this wasn't just 1 or 2 people that were feeding this back. It was certainly a theme that was coming from the data that we were collecting. And I think what shocked me, I suppose, is, I know it probably shocked most of you, is that actually in our day jobs, this couldn't be further from the truth. We use randomisation to give randomised trials the gold standard effect that they have. It's the underpinning process behind the fair test of treatment. And I suppose we knew then that there was something that we needed to do with the general public around creating a greater understanding and awareness around the trial concept itself, and in particular around randomisation. So there's a number of initiatives within our public engagement pillar that we work on. As Claire mentioned at the outset, START is it is our longest running initiative. It's hugely successful to date. It's the schools teaching awareness of randomised trials. It was presented last month by both Declan and Linda Beastie, so the recording of that will be available for people that want to have a look about what that is about. But essentially that is around primary school children between the ages of 8 and 12 conducting their very own randomised trials in a classroom setting. We've also done some preliminary work here with our colleagues in Oslo in Norway, in particular Andy Oxman there, who's leading on the Informed Health Choices, and the website for that initiative is informedhealthchoices.org. And we're doing some preliminary work around looking at bringing this teaching tool, which improves children's critical thinking skills, to Ireland. And then from that came the idea of the People's Trial. I suppose the idea behind the People's Trial had been something that was in the TMRN for quite a while, but we weren't sure how we were going to execute it. We weren't sure indeed of the uptake of it. But I'm delighted to say that this is now running and is a live project right at the moment. So the People's Trial is funded by the Health Research Board, which is our funder here in Ireland, and that we have always found our funder to be very supportive of any of the public engagement and outreach initiatives that we've wanted to do within the TMRN. And they had a very nice scheme called a Knowledge Exchange and Dissemination scheme, which has allowed us to, I suppose, along with the day job and the work that we do in the TMRN, to do something like this. It's a one-year project, and I know as many of you will empathise doing research. A year can seem like a long time to some and can seem like a very short time to others. So it's an ambitious project in that in a one-year period we are handing over the controls of a fun, interactive, randomised controlled trial to the public. There's been a lot of learning in this. There's certainly been a lot of unknowns. There's been a lot of working week to week on this initiative, and it's been very fun and exciting. In just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Elaine to talk a little bit more about the People's Trial itself. But I suppose, like all good initiatives and like all good projects, it's backed by an even more impressive steering group. I think the People's Trial, it's limited in its funding, but it has possibly given the best bang for its buck, so to speak, because of these people that are listed here. And the PI of this, as I mentioned, is Declan Devan. But there's a lot of faces here that you will know, and I think it's great to say that there's a lot of faces here that you won't know. We have people ranging from patient representatives to an undergraduate student in NUI Galway. We have representatives from the University of Aberdeen and Trialforge, Cochrane UK. There is a wealth of experience and knowledge and information across this team, and they have delivered tirelessly to the People's Trial. So I just wanted to acknowledge them before we go any further. So I'm just going to hand over to Elaine now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the People's Trial itself.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandra. So my name is Elaine Finucane. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today about a project very close to my heart, the People's Trial. So how did the People's Trial come about? Well, as Sandra and Claire have just mentioned, the START competition is also a HRB TMRN project. And in running that, we were often asked about the possibility of START for adults. And that got us thinking, and so the People's Trial was conceived. As you can see from this slide, 7.6 billion people in the world. Of those, 5 billion have a mobile device, with 4.3 billion having internet access. And that figure is growing by 1 million per day, and that's phenomenal. Sandra, if we can have the second slide there, please. With this constant access to information, how easy is it to critically evaluate all claims that are being made? And this is where we like the People's Trial to help. We've designed the People's Trial to help the public learn about randomized trials, to understand why they matter and to be better equipped to think critically, particularly about health claims. Also, as the People's Trial is so interactive, it will hopefully help researchers learn how best to involve the public in the steps of a trial process. As a midwife, researcher and mother, I feel that the People's Trial was primarily devised to help evaluate health claims, but it has a much broader impact. It also supports everyday decisions. For instance, if you see an ad for shampoo that tells you 90% of users found their hair was glossier, is that 90% of 10 people or of 10,000 people? Wouldn't that knowledge make a difference to the public? Sandra, if we can have the next slide. So the People's Trial really is all about learning from doing. We wanted it to be as inclusive as possible. So we came up with the concept of a fun, online, interactive, randomized controlled trial, where the public would be involved in and share in the decision-making of all aspects of the trial design and conduct. The public would decide the question we would answer, how we will answer it, and how we would disseminate it. Next slide. This all sounded like a great idea until we realized that this meant we didn't know the trial question, what our outcomes are, how we will measure the outcomes, how we will report the findings. And as you can imagine, our ethics application was challenging to say the least. Next slide, Sandra. For the People's Trial, we have used social media for all of our advertising and communication. And the first thing we asked the people to do was to submit fun, potential questions to us. And you can imagine that with this stipulation, we got some very interesting questions, including, does performing a rain dance make a difference to rain levels in comparison to not doing a rain dance? So living in the west of Ireland, as most of you know, meant that most of us were praying that this one didn't become the People's Trial question, or at the very least that us in the west of Ireland would be randomised to the comparison. So following on from this, through a modified Delphi method, we asked the public to choose their top 10 and then finally their top 3 questions. And we're now at the stage where we have our trial question and are currently carrying out a systematic review to make sure this question hasn't been answered already. We've used social media to its fullest, I believe, to explain the concept of research waste and its importance. In the next phase, which will launch on November 11th, we will again ask to go back to the public to define the intervention, the comparator and the outcomes for the People's Trial. Next slide, Sandra, please. Although, unfortunately, I can't share the actual People's Trial question just yet, these are our top 10 questions as decided by the public. As you can see, exercise, sleep, social media, influence featured prominently throughout all the questions received. And if these were to be included in our final question, we would now be asking the public to define how we would define and measure these concepts in our next phase. For example, if you were to take the question, does light exercise in the evening make a difference to sleep quality and compared to no exercise in the evening? We'd be asking the public to define the intervention light exercise. Is it 10 minutes of walking, or for the more energetic amongst us, 30 minutes of spin class, or 15 minutes of yoga, or all of the above? For sleep quality, we would be asking them to define sleep quality and then tell us how we should measure this outcome. So is it measured in the number of hours you sleep, the time it takes to fall asleep, all of these, or something completely different? The next slide, Sandra. So once we have our question and we have fully defined its components and decided how we were going to collect the data, we're getting to the exciting part. We're now going to start running the trial. So as with the rest of the People's Trial, this part will be conducted completely online. Participants will consent to take part in the randomized control trial online. They'll self-randomize to the intervention or comparator online and self-report their data online. So once this data has been analysed, we will again go back to the public and ask them how they would like us to report the findings and where they would like the study disseminated. So we have interesting times lying ahead for us. I suppose promoting and maintaining public engagement and inclusion has driven all decisions in the People's Trial. To assist this, we've created, with the help and support of amazing contributors, and I can't stress that enough, whiteboard videos that are all available on our website and our YouTube channel. These explain in bite-sized pieces each step of the randomised control trial as we go through it in the People's Trial. So while answering the trial question is absolutely a priority, the focus is also to create a space online where people can contribute, give the public the opportunity to discover why clinical trials are important, and also to show people's participation can positively improve the randomised trials process and provide an opportunity for shared learning around what works best. Sandra now has some data which will actually show just how successful this focus has been.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. So I suppose now we're moving on to looking a little bit of the impact that the People's Trial has had and the engagement and the outreach and how far has this gone. And as we've just mentioned, we're still in the thick of the People's Trial. We are actually only finished the first 2 phases, so we have a long way to go. But looking at this graph, I think if you'd shown me this map a couple of months ago, I would have been thrilled. I think the steering group would be the same, that we would have this level of widespread global reach, which I'm delighted to say. So I suppose there's a lot of aspects and there's a lot of layers to the metrics and to the impact of the People's Trial. On one hand, you can say that the measure that we should be looking at here is, was the trial effective? So if it's looking at sleep quality or if it's looking at exercise. But actually the main metrics are much bigger than that, and it's looking at engagement and involvement and reach. So we can look at this in two different ways. The first is that you can look at the resource that has been put together, so the website itself. So just people that simply visit the website because they're engaging with the resources that are available. We're hoping that they're at least thinking about the idea of the people's trial, thinking about randomized trials more generally. There's fantastic resources available on this website which are being released as the trial progresses and as the stages progress. And Elaine is far too modest to say it, but she has put a huge amount of work into the fantastic whiteboard videos that are available. So I think there's huge learning there for people to use these videos with regards to understanding the various steps of a trial. But looking at our global reach here and just looking at the website and where people have accessed it from, initially, I suppose our concern is that it would be too Ireland and UK heavy and that we wouldn't actually step outside broader than that. But I think this reach, just looking at the top 10 countries, is fantastic. To say that the People's Trial has been accessed in Canada, Russia, Brazil, India, I think is a lovely measure of the impact that this has had at such an early stage as well. And then I suppose you can look at the metrics of the people who have actually engaged with the People's Trial, so who have participated in the various surveys and the various rounds and phases of the trial. And again, we're only at phase 2, we're about to enter in phase 3. So looking at this here, we have the phase 1 was selecting the trial question. So this was opening up the floodgates, asking people to select or pitch in the question that they are interested in. And we see that moving on to the next phase, which is phase 2A and phase 2B. So again, just like a normal trial, we then had a ranking exercise and a prioritization exercise around the questions which had been submitted. So we see that the number of people taking part in each of those phases has increased at each round. And again, the number of countries has increased from 20 taking part in phase 1 to 42 taking part in phase 2B, which I think is fantastic outreach. And again, I'm always mindful that this is actually before we even start the actual trial. And I think my own opinion maybe is that who knows the metrics that are going to be for the next round, because we know the question is going to be really engaging and hopefully capture people's imagination with regards to taking part. So we're really hoping that these metrics somewhat go through the roof for the next phase, hopefully. With regards to age and gender, I guess it's pretty much people like myself. I'm female and I'm between the ages of 25 and 44. And again, how people are engaging with the People's Trial is predominantly mobile phone use. So about 50% of people are accessing on their mobile phone. This was something that was predicted or kind of flagged by the steering group at the start, and the website was optimized for mobile phone use because of this. One question that was asked in the phases, or is asked at each phase, is around the participants' understanding of trials. And we can see here that across the two phases, well, I suppose 3 phases that have taken part to date, is that the majority of people do have a good understanding of trials. We would like to do a bit more work in actually shifting that, because I think we need to really target the people that have the lesser knowledge or understanding around trials for this to really bring meaningful change and bring meaningful knowledge and awareness to people who wouldn't ordinarily know what a trial was. So that's, I think, a challenge for the next phases, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how that changes over the various phases of the trial. So what's next for the People's Trial? As Elaine mentioned, I think she said November 11th, Elaine, was that the date for phase 3? Great, thanks. Yeah, exactly. Which will be starting really shortly. So that will be announcing the coveted number 1 question that was ranked by all of the public and participants. Again, we were the ones just sitting back, beavering away in the back end while the public made the decision. And then we have to look at reporting the trial. And Elaine mentioned there as well, again, it's all about this unknown. As academics and researchers, we sit down with our hats on us and we start thinking about the journal we're going to publish this in. But in fact, maybe the public will come back with something really different here. Maybe this is something that we're not prepared for. We know that, for example, the START competition, when The children are allowed to report their findings in any way they like. We've had them report them in all sorts of wonderful ways, and not just your typical formal publication. So the reporting of the trial is going to be important to showcase, okay, was it effective? What did the findings of the trial show? But also there's huge learning for this whole process. It literally has been week to week adapting and tailoring the platform for the People's Trial to meet the needs of what the public are asking us to do. And I think there's huge learning involved there with regards to this as a platform itself. And that's something also that we need to look at sharing after this. So we also, as we've mentioned, these fantastic resources. Unfortunately, we couldn't play the videos for you today because of the software wouldn't facilitate it, but I know Rianfa and Claire are going to pop in the chat box. They're going to give you the link to the YouTube channel, which has all of these fantastic whiteboards, which the team have worked have worked tirelessly on. They're fantastic resources to have, and I think we see a bigger use for these resources beyond the People's Trial going forward. For example, in both undergraduate and maybe postgraduate teaching. I mean, these are whiteboard videos that are explaining fairly complex trial processes in a very easy to understand manner. And we've been very lucky to have a range of volunteers, both within the steering group but outside of it as well, who've gotten on board and helped with the recording of those resources. So we're delighted to have them, and I would welcome everyone to go and check them out and see if they could be used within your own line of work. So I guess we have to finish on a call to action really for the People's Trial, and that is get involved. We would really welcome if everyone would get involved in the People's Trial, but I think more importantly is that we look outside of our comfort zone and we take this home. We take it to our friends, our families, our WhatsApp groups, our Facebook pages, and we help the broader public get involved in this. I think this is a lovely way actually of saying to people, you know, you always ask me what I do at work every day. Well, here's what I do, and help people understand about what a trial is that way. I think it's a lovely way to engage with our own personal networks as well. As I mentioned, we have a fantastic team who have been involved in the People's Trial in our steering group. I have to give a big shout out to Anne O'Brien, who's always so busy beavering away in the back end, providing all of the data and looking at all of the survey responses. And also we've had fantastic social media presences, as Elaine mentioned. If you're following the People's Trial on any of our platforms, you will know that it's very well populated with really fun and engaging pieces of information. So Marina Zaki has been instrumental on Twitter, and Vivian Hanrahan also on Facebook. And I know I'm only touching on a few people that are involved in this. So really, we're very lucky to have everyone involved. So again, just thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. Thank the organisers. We're delighted to be able to share the People's Trial with you. We welcome people to follow us on social media, and Elaine and myself are very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was a really nice, clear presentation with some lovely graphics too. Rianfa has put the link to the video already up in the chat box. So if anybody would like to follow that link and see some examples of what's been talked about today, just go to the chat box and you'll see it there. And also, if you have any questions, please do either put them in the chat box and we can turn to them and address them, or if you're able to speak, just click to unmute your microphone and we'll be able to come to you and you'll be able to speak directly. That's always nice to have some sort of discussion. Sean Tweek has already started us off. So we have a question from him, which I'll put to you. Do you think that like START, the People's Trial is worth repeating as it is in future years? Obviously, there's issues about funding.
I'll jump in there, Elaine. I definitely think so. I think it's, I suppose we're so involved in it at the minute that I think we nearly feel a little bit lonely if we think about closing this down, because the amount of work that has gone into the back end of this, to, you know, the platform and how it responds to the survey, how it has responded to the people's feedback. I think the platform is there and the structure is there. It would certainly be great to repeat this and to keep this going, but absolutely mindful of the amount of work that has gone in, and as I said, we're very lucky that we've had a lot of goodwill from a lot of people to make this happen. So funding is a major factor here, but I do think there is something here that would be lovely to keep it going, and I'm sure Elaine, you probably want to jump in there, Elaine.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think we have to keep remembering that this is a KEDS grant, so it's a knowledge exchange grant. And so even though Sandra's put up the huge figures that we have that have actually taken part in the trial and have answered questions and submitted questions, we also need to be very mindful of the fact of the amount of engagement we'd have on social media. So we've had people who may have just logged into the trial, watched the whiteboard videos, but who would have never had any contact with anything promoting why we do randomized control trials or research or clinical trials. So we have to be mindful that it's a much broader reach than just the participants of the trial. So I think for that reason alone, absolutely it should be continued into the future.
Yeah, that's a really positive idea. We've got a comment from one of our CTU colleagues which relates to that issue of reach, asking which social media sites did most participants sign up from?
It's actually been quite varied. So initially, we had a huge, because I think we'd have some research colleagues on Twitter, so that they were help to promote us. So we had a good outreach with Twitter, but absolutely Facebook and Instagram have come back up to match with it, and particularly for the non-researchers, we've had a huge outreach to non-researchers on Instagram and Facebook.
And thinking about your non-researchers, I was very interested in the data you were putting up about measuring people's sort of knowledge of trials, because that's something I've been interested in for a long time, and I think lots of us are, and it's quite a tricky thing, especially in the light of your comment about randomization. I've certainly never heard the sort of laziness idea about randomization before, so it would be quite interesting to sort of have more information about that sort of qualitative side and that sort of measured side of what you're doing, and then to be able to know whether taking part in the people's trial has changed that.
Yeah, and we will be running an evaluation at the end of the trial, where we will actually go back and ask people who've not only participated in the trial but on probably social media as well, to evaluate how the effects that it's had for them.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, and I think that's a crucial element in funding applications for future research, isn't it? If you can demonstrate that sort of effect.
Absolutely, yes.
From one to another. That's great. We have a question from Tim Sprosen about your ethics approval and thinking about the logistics of the work that you're doing. For the next stage of the trial, do you need to go back to them and get approval each time, or do you have a sort of a package of approval for all of your stages?
So no, we don't have to go back to ethics at each time, and this is basically because we know that the trial question was very low risk. We'll say the examples that were given, and we knew the parameters with which this would be. So again, this is a very low risk, fun, inclusive trial. We don't. We didn't envisage, and now that we do actually know the question, we know that this is going to be very low risk. So we don't have to go back at each time for ethics.
Oh, that's really helpful. That really facilitates this sort of activity, doesn't it?
And I guess, again, as we've mentioned, the learning going through this has been huge, and I think that would have been a difficult one if it would have delayed this. If we knew the parameters that we were going to stick behind, and this is just about doing something really fun and really easy to take part, and certainly very low risk.
I thought it was very interesting when you were talking about the ideas about where to disseminate and how to disseminate your research, because we often have our own set ways of doing this, and I think it might be worth thinking about all the different ways in which this type of research can change how we do other elements of our research. So for those of us who are interested in PPI, it's quite helpful to think about the different places and the different formats of dissemination, so that we don't just keep repeating the same same exercise, I guess. So it'd be really interesting in the longer term to hear about the ideas about how to disseminate and how best to reach people in what format. Will you be in a position to share that later on?
Absolutely,
I think that, again, this is going to be really interesting, is what we're getting back from the general public that's going to challenge us. And I suppose going back to START and what I mentioned earlier, and I'm not suggesting this is going to be the same, but these are primary school children. We've had a school enter on a couple of occasions for START, and they've presented their findings as a drama. They've acted out the results of their randomized trial in a drama. And I mean, it was incredible to watch. And I remember watching it thinking, gosh, that's real outside the box thinking with regards to reporting a trial. And, we don't know what's going to come from the people's trial, obviously. It's going to be a different approach. But last year, again, going back to START, one of the shortlisted projects that made it to the final of START was a podcast. And I found there was something really lovely, sitting down, listening to children, just no images, no graphics, just talking about their experiences of the trial and the results. It was so simple, but really effective. And it really got us thinking about how we report findings of trials. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we tend to put on our academic hats, and I certainly did. What journal will we publish this in? And I think we will do that. We know we want to publish the findings traditionally, but we definitely are going to look at the feedback from the public. And I think that all that information is something that we will all be interested in looking at. We can only do so much in this because it is funded. It does have a limited budget, but we will look at everything that's been sent back to us, and hopefully we can share those results back out as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is it's a really tricky issue, because you can get somebody to open a document, but you have to sort of make it interesting enough for them to keep reading and start listening to a podcast, but keep listening to it to the end to get all the messages. So that's a great idea, a great way of making it sort of, what's the word? I'm not sure what the word is, but durable, I guess. That it's not just something that people check out; it's something that they listen to through the end and pick up all of your messages.
Absolutely.
I was also struck by the need to develop a website that's accessible. I mean, your slides show that you've got lots of colour in, and it's very attractive. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges that you've had in developing the website and the platform for this sort of research and making it attractive and usable? That must have been quite a big deal.
It was. I suppose the biggest hurdle to get over was how dynamic the website itself needed to be, because we started off with a website describing what the People's Trial hoped to do, but very fast it came to choosing a question. Then the question was further refined, and now we're on to the stage where they're going to work on outcomes and comparators and interventions and defining those. So at each stage, the website itself needed to be developed further. So we have had great fun with it, and I'm sure our IT people have great fun with us, but it worked really well, and I suppose it kept the interest going as well, in that the participants, every time they came on, there was a new whiteboard. So we had developed a whiteboard with each stage, but we couldn't develop the whiteboard until we knew what the next stage was going to be. So there was such a fast turnaround, but it did keep everything fresh and accessible.
Yeah, and I think as well the learning there's kind of nearly two aspects. There was the look and the feel and the accessibility of the website, and also then the survey tool that we were using to collect all of the information. How that was embedded into the site was something that I know Anne O'Brien is very familiar with, and how that embedding has worked, and then getting the data back out. I mean, it's funny. I definitely started off with a kind of a simplified version in my head, but then from talking to the guys who've been in the thick of this, that has been quite a complex process and not as easy as we thought initially. And I'm even smiling as I look at the slide now in front of us, that graphic. I know, Elaine, you had great fun with making that graphic more representative, because I think initially was it all slim people, nobody in a wheelchair, nobody with a cane, nobody pregnant, nobody, and it was rejigging that graphic is something as simple as that, but that we made sure that everything was felt inclusive and reflective of the people that we wanted to take part.
And I suppose it's kind of the concept that we kept in our minds the whole time, that we wanted it to be the people's trial. So the people is everybody. So it had to be inclusive for everybody who wanted to get involved. And that kind of drove every decision that we made in terms of the website, the trial design, the methodology, everything.
Yeah, well, you can see it, even just like you say in that image, you can see the work that's got into it. If we want to share your work with people and encourage them to take part, which is the best route to do that? Do you have a piece of text that we can share? And which link would you like us to send them to? Because you've got lots of options there.
I suppose, go ahead, Sandra.
No, you go on, Lynn, you first.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would think most times we're driving people back to the website, because the website has everything. So it's www.thepeoplestrial.ie. And when you go into the landing page, you can either go to the current page or go to a learn more section, which tells you about everything that's gone on beforehand. But that's always kind of in the focus, is to bring people back to the website.
Okay. I'm sure there's some of us can do that for you. I've certainly said to Declan that I'd be happy to share the link with the MSc students who are studying clinical trials at LSHTM, and he felt that was appropriate. So that's quite interesting. So although there are people who are learning about trials at quite a sophisticated level, that you're still happy to have those sorts of people join your endeavour too. So you get a very broad base, and of course you'll get people from different countries then. So I think it's quite useful for us to think about who are the people who might be interested enough in trials, who are the people who might want to learn more about trials from scratch, to help sort of this endeavour work. We have a question from Derek. He said, how do you feel this is helping with increasing demand for transparency in research? That's a really interesting question.
I think actually a good example even of that, Elaine, is the recent conversation that was had on Twitter. So again, we're publicising this heavily on social media, and straight away somebody, I actually don't know who they are, but somebody popped up with a response and said, how is this going to be transparent, or how are you going to look at reducing research waste? Is this going to be an unanswered question? And it's funny, I feel we are being challenged in a really good way on social media when we put up a post. We've had lots of comments from people straight away, kind of just keeping us in check and making sure that we are actually applying to the usual rules of that we would apply to ourselves when we do research, and keeping ourselves to a high standard, I suppose, in for want of a better word, real trials. But again, I think the engagement aspect has just opened up everything. So we now are fully explaining, why we want you to pitch in a question, or why we want you to prioritise and rank them. And I think that through the understanding, it's helping open this up and increase the transparency. I don't know, Elaine, do you want to jump in there as well?
Yep. I was just going to say that I suppose the main thing for people to push transparency in research, they first of all have to understand what research is and why it's important. So by just even building on that understanding and knowledge, then that will force transparency, because they'll expect it, and they will be able to critically evaluate research and force questions to be answered.
That's a really interesting answer, and obviously you can think about the ways in which, if that changes how researchers behave because they're being held to these standards, that will have spillovers into their other research as well, and it's all sort of cumulative. I think we've come to the end of any of the questions that are posted here. Is there anything that you would like to mention that you haven't covered so far?
I suppose just that we're at a really crucial part of the trial now, and we really would like as broad an involvement as possible. So if you could support us online, social media, to get people involved and taking part in the trial, we would really appreciate it. That
would be great, and it certainly would be interesting for us to hear if you do have any sort of benefits of having presented this webinar. Thank you.
Oh,
and on that note, Rionfa has posted a link in the chat box for any of you who would like to give feedback on the webinar today. We really do value that feedback. It isn't just a sort of a token thing for us. We respond to the feedback in thinking about what webinars you might want to hear, if there's anybody who wants to volunteer. But we also present the findings annually from the feedback in a to the network. So please do think about giving your feedback there. Just follow that link and do that. And certainly if anybody's interested in showcasing their work and reaching the sort of audience that we have for these webinars, we have slots for next year. So we'd be very, very interested in hearing from you and hearing about your research. And the slides and the recordings go up on our website, so there'll be a good way of you showcasing your work. The next webinar in December, we don't have a date yet, but that's going to be presented by Anna Kearney from Liverpool, and she's going to talk about patient information leaflets. So it would be great if you come along to that once the date is announced and finalised. We've just had another interesting thing from Tim Sprosen. He's asking if you can do an update webinar in the next few months. So that would be great for me if you wanted to take one of our slots later in the year next year to tell us how the People's Trial has unfolded. We'd be very interested in that.
Yeah, I think we'd love to.
That would be great. It would be lovely, because then we could have all 3 recordings up on the webinar website together, the start trial, this one, and then the update. So great idea. Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to both of you for presenting. Thanks all for your questions, and see you in December.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.